this is my introduction. Again, this is long before we called it spiritual intelligence, But Bill Johnson came to our church, our little church in Weaverville. He became our pastor. It was 40, I think our church was 35, 40 people. And his first sermon series was a series on the gifts of the Spirit. And so because our church was so small, we would have a morning service where he would teach, and then we'd have an evening service. There maybe be 10, 15 of us there. And we would practice the things we learned about the gifts of the Spirit or whatever it is he was teaching. So it was activation. The evenings were activations. Well, I had a company, a fleet company that had about, I think, 22 or 25 trucks. And they would rotate them out every 3 or 4 years. So they'd buy like 7 at a time. And they bought these Chevy trucks. This is in the 80s. And we were an hour from society. So we lived in the mountains. And they were my largest account. So they get these brand new trucks and these brand new Chevy trucks. And within about, I think, maybe a week, the first one breaks down. It won't start. So they tow it in. Obviously, they're my biggest account. So I'm on it. I'm working on it. And, and I worked on it for about an hour, couldn't figure out why it wouldn't start. And I said, hey, just tow it to the Chevy dealer. It's an hour down the road. And they said, we got 7 or 10 more of these trucks. Like, we can't keep towing them down there every time this happens. Like, we want you to figure it out. So I worked on that thing 3 or 4 days. I actually got a hold of the Chevy dealer. He faxed me the wiring diagram. He was very kind to me, walked through some tests with me. And by Saturday, I'm like, I have no idea why this truck won't start. They don't want to take it back to the dealer. So I'm kind of, what do I do? So Sunday morning, Bill taught on the word of knowledge, like information you get by the Holy Spirit. You could get it some other way, but the Holy Spirit gives you this information. So at night, we're doing this activation. And, and Bill's doing things like, okay, I have this, does anyone have a problem with their right knee? I feel like there's someone in the room with a problem with the right knee and the pain's right here. And he's kind of doing that word of knowledge, like for healing. And I'm watching this, but all I'm thinking about all weekend long is like, I got to fix this truck. What's wrong with this truck? So we're doing this activation. I'm not totally connected to the activation. And then I have this thought, I wonder if God knows anything about trucks. Now, I know it sounds really stupid now, but at the time I'm like, my rationale was God made bodies, so he obviously knows about a body, but he didn't build trucks. Does he know anything about electronics? So the next day, obviously Monday, I go to work. I work on the truck for about a couple hours. And I tell the guys, like, push this truck out. And then tonight, when you close the shop, push it back in. I'm going to come back tonight, work on it. So I come back in the evening and I'm like, okay, I'm going to use my word of knowledge gift on this truck. And I really was like, I'd never heard anyone talk about this. I'd never heard a testimony about this. So I was like, I wonder how you do this. So oftentimes with word of knowledge, we would like touch each other, like lay hands on people. So I'm like, okay, there's nobody here. So it's nighttime. It's like 7, 8 o'clock at night. So I put my hands on the fender and I say, Holy Spirit, why won't this truck start? And like very clearly in my mind, I see a picture of a diode with a wire off, broken. And I hear in my mind, this voice that says, there's a broken wire under the right front fender off a diode. Now, here's the thing, Shaun. The wiring diagram showed that there was no wiring, there was no diode in the right front fender. The tech that I was working with never mentioned a diode in the right front fender. And I'm like, oh, what do I got to lose? So I put the truck up on a rack. I got it up in the air and it was all, underneath in your fender well, it's all that black undercoating. I get up there with the flashlight and I look and there's a broken wire. And I'm like, okay. So I let it down a little bit and I solder the wire to the component, which turns out to be a diode, and it starts right up. And Shaun, that was like Christopher Columbus discovering the world was round and not flat for me. Like it opened a door. It was I know it's such a silly illustration, but it opened the door to a profound idea that God knows about everything. And when I couldn't fix it, he knew what to do. And honestly, from that day on, I started incorporating words of knowledge. I'm a diagnostician, as a professional diagnostician. My job was to diagnose the automotive, the cars, the trucks, the computer systems, all the fuel management systems. That was my main job. So I started using the word of knowledge in diagnosis, and I don't think I ever had anything I couldn't fix, because I would try IQ and EQ, and then I'm like, all right, now let's flow over to SQ, and then of course that opened the door to lots of other things. Well, if God knows about that, then obviously He knows about politics. He knows about COVID. He knows about everything.
I
Long
love that
story.
story. Well, and something changes in your mind when you realize that not only does God know, but He wants to empower you to actually carry forward the solution. It's like, man, my dad really cares. That's a fantastic story. I love that. It's so relatable and it's so practical. People aren't just getting words of knowledge about emotional things or healing things. It's actually a practical thing that made a difference for your business and your ability to service a customer. I love that. That's fantastic.